Erin Napier is more than just a familiar face on television. She is a designer, an entrepreneur, and one half of HGTV's celebrated hometown power couple. Alongside her husband, Ben Napier, she became widely admired for breathing life back into forgotten houses in Laurel, Mississippi. Together, they didn't just renovate buildings. They reimagined entire spaces, infusing them with new stories and fresh purpose. Erin's connection to small-town life runs deep. She grew up on a 40-acre chicken farm near Laurel, so the rhythms of rural living are etched into her roots. Ben, on the other hand, brought the strength, skill, and craftsmanship that grounded their projects. A talented woodworker and craftsman, he blended artistry with muscle, ensuring Erin's designs took shape in tangible, lasting ways. Beyond their show, the two-cone Laurel Mercantile Co., a business devoted to selling American-made goods, further anchoring them to their values of tradition and community. To fans, Erin and Ben embody wholesome ideals, family values, a devotion to craftsmanship, and a genuine love of community. They appear as a couple deeply committed to doing things the right way, side by side, with authenticity. Yet beneath this picture-perfect image, questions linger. Could there be cracks behind the curated smiles and heartwarming narratives? To understand, we need to look more closely at how their image was shaped, celebrated, and later scrutinized. Early praise and carefully built image when Hometown first aired, Erin and Ben received glowing praise for reintroducing sincerity and warmth, into a genre often dominated by drama and excess. Their story resonated deeply with viewers, a daughter returning to her hometown to renew and preserve its character. Supported by her husband's craftsmanship, their on-screen presence radiated authenticity whenever audiences tuned in. They saw not just renovations, but a couple working lovingly together, honoring their town's heritage and telling the story of each home. Erin's design philosophy revolved around uncovering hidden histories within walls, while Ben handled the structure and woodworking that transformed those visions into reality. Together, they created an appealing balance of style and substance. The couple's public persona leaned heavily on humility, hands-on work, and a respect for place. But like any television program, what the audience saw was carefully crafted. HGTV and its producers edited episodes with drama, pacing, and emotional impact in mind. Scenes were cut, conversations were shaped, and certain moments were highlighted, while others were quietly downplayed. The irony was that this editing made viewers feel as though they were seeing the real Erin and Ben, when in truth, much of what aired was filtered. As their popularity soared, the Napiers gained power not just as designers, but as trusted narrators of Laurel's story. Fans didn't just admire them. They began to trust their worldview. But with that closeness came a double edge. The more fans believed in their image, the quicker they noticed when Erin's responses to criticism seemed defensive or sharp. Over time, whispers of unease and subtle critiques grew louder. What started as glowing praise shifted into pointed questions about how Erin handled public scrutiny and represented her values. Defensiveness toward criticism. One of the earliest warning signs about Erin Napier's public brand was how she reacted to criticism. It wasn't simply about what was said. It was about her tone and her need to maintain control over how she and her work were perceived. This tension first drew widespread attention in April 2024, when Erin posted a candid Instagram reel while riding in a car with Ben. In the video, she addressed what she called harsh and cruel comments on her Instagram. She even went as far as labeling some of her followers vulgar, instead of focusing on herself. Erin shifted the harm, suggesting that people weren't just being cruel to her, but were being disrespectful to the families who lived in the renovated homes. Ben joined in, saying that many online commenters were intentionally hurtful. "I'm afraid a lot of the people out there are being rude and mean because they want to be hurtful," he said. Erin concluded the reel by telling persistently negative followers to unfollow her, before thanking those who left kind comments and encouraging them to keep being you. The video drew significant attention. Too many. It wasn't just another celebrity clapping back at critics. It revealed how Erin framed criticism and just how much control she wanted over her public image. Fans began to wonder if someone known for warmth and sensitivity could also carry such visible hardness. And this wasn't the first instance of her tightening boundaries. Back in 2020, Erin had announced she was disabling Instagram comments until 2021. Describing it as a move to reduce noise, her caption explained, "It gets harder every day to shoulder every opinion from every direction. There's too much noise." In interviews with outlets like Us Weekly, she openly admitted that she struggled with online negativity, pointing out that people would never speak to her that way in person. This pattern resurfaced when Erin deleted a post featuring her daughter after receiving cruel COVID-related parenting criticisms. Each time, instead of opening dialogue or allowing difficult conversations, Erin quickly set boundaries, blocked dissent, or shut comments down altogether. For someone who built her image on community, sensitivity, and openness, critics argued that her defensiveness clashed with her brand. These sharp reactions, while protective, raised the first red flags. When a public figure becomes overly focused on filtering dissent, it often signals deeper issues: control, image management, and an inability to tolerate outside perspectives, rigid parenting, and social media stance's strict approach extended into her parenting philosophy, particularly around technology. While many parents grapple with questions of screen time, Erin drew firm, uncompromising lines that soon looked less like personal choices and more like declarations. One striking example was her decision to pull her daughter, Helen, out of first grade on days when the school used tablets or digital instruction. In a September 2024 Instagram story, Erin explained that the school accommodated this request, allowing her daughter to leave early whenever digital lessons were scheduled. Instead of participating, Helen would spend time in Ben's woodshop or playing on the farm. Erin compared early exposure to technology to handing a child car keys or alcohol, an analogy that startled many. For critics, her stance raised troubling questions. What happens when most education relies on digital platforms? What happens to children who are deliberately shielded from tools their peers are mastering? Is it fair to deny them exposure and choice? Her philosophy didn't remain a private family matter. In 2023, Erin and Ben co-founded Osprey Old School Parents Raising Engaged Youth. The initiative encourages families to pledge to keep kids off social media until high school graduation. Through Osprey, parents can form local nests, host events, and share strategies to resist early digital exposure. Erin repeatedly linked this movement to her personal experiences, including the pain she felt when someone criticized her appearance after she posted a photo of her daughter. For her, that moment cemented the decision to delay her children's entry into the online world. But critics argued that her parenting approach reflected privilege. Many families simply don't have the flexibility to pull children from school or closely monitor all digital exposure. As one parent asked, "What about parents who don't have flexible jobs to pick up kids early?" Erin responded by suggesting that sitters or grandparents could step in. But this only highlighted the gap between her reality and that of most families. What troubled critics most was not just her personal choice, but her effort to universalize it. By founding Osprey, she wasn't simply saying, "This is how we live," but implying that this should be the standard for all. Fans who once admired her down-to-earth persona now wondered if her worldview was too rigid and controlling. For a public figure celebrated for warmth and relatability, such uncompromising rules created distance instead of connection. Diversity and representation issues. When you first watch Hometown, the focus is clear: charming renovations, cozy southern touches, and Erin's friendly presence, restoring the spirit of Laurel. But beneath the warmth lies another tension, one centered on diversity, representation, and whose stories get told. Viewers began noticing that while the show spotlighted history and heritage, it often left out voices and communities that were just as much a part of Laurel. The question wasn't just about houses, it was about who gets to be seen, celebrated, and remembered. According to the 2020 U.S. Census, the city's population was made up of about 62% Black or African American residents, 26% white non-Hispanic residents, and 29.1% white residents overall, with the remaining percentages falling into smaller racial categories. Yet, despite these statistics, What do most viewers actually see when they look at Hometown? The dominant image tends to be one of white homeowners, picturesque restorations of southern houses, and an emphasis on an aesthetic that highlights classic charm. What's noticeably missing are episodes or storylines that consistently center around Black residents, or homes, or their lived experiences in Laurel's community. That disparity hasn't gone unnoticed, it's been pointed out repeatedly. Many critics and fans alike argue that Hometown subtly erases or sidelines the Black majority of the town. One longtime Reddit user observed that the show presents such a limited view of Laurel that someone unfamiliar with its demographics might easily assume the city is overwhelmingly white. Entire media outlets, including Nicki Swift, have echoed these criticisms, stressing how selective storytelling and framing create a false impression of exclusion and erasure. This naturally raises the question, is this omission just a byproduct of production limitations or something more intentional? While the answer is partly tied to production, the pattern persists. The version of Laurel that appears on screen is carefully curated, highly selective, and simplified, a portrayal that serves as a warning in itself. The issue came to a head in 2020. During a turning point for America, the murder of George Floyd and the nationwide protests that followed placed racial injustice and representation into the spotlight. During this moment, a fan asked Erin Napier why she hadn't publicly spoken about the movement. Her response was that her silence was intentional, not because she disagreed, but because she had chosen a different way of engaging. Erin explained, "My social media quiet is not a difference of opinion. Taking a bigger stand lies in the small opportunities we meet daily." She pointed to Laurel's racial makeup and highlighted her personal relationships, noting that she went to church with people not my color as evidence of alignment with INCLUSIV. In interviews, Erin and her husband Ben stressed that they believed real change happens through daily actions, not online posts. Ben expressed this view bluntly, saying, "You're trying to address something that happened on a city street in America. Through a social media outlet where people post recipes, too many." However, their words came across as vague, dismissive, or evasive. Critics argued that if platforms like social media weren't appropriate places to address systemic issues, then where else could those conversations reach millions of people at once? Fans who heard Erin insist that she preferred to act rather than post began questioning whether she was avoiding accountability. Her silence, for them, felt like a refusal to engage directly. The controversy extended beyond what Erin said. It was also about what she didn't show. Since Hometown is her platform, the choice to downplay public commentary on racial justice suggested she preferred curating harmony instead of grappling with the raw, uncomfortable tensions present in Laurel. To some viewers, this didn't matter much. But for others, the inconsistency became glaring when they compared Erin's polished public image and the Hometown brand against the reality of Laurel's demographics and social climate. The selective portrayal of the town revealed that Hometown isn't a documentary, it's a narrative. And when a majority Black city is presented on television as almost entirely white, that's not just an omission, it's storytelling. It reflects gatekeeping, deciding whose stories get airtime and whose do not. This kind of selective representation is, in its own way, narrative control. The warning signs here are subtle, yet profound, when your brand claims to represent local life but systematically excludes a large part of that life. Your portrayal becomes selective rather than authentic. Early critics who flagged the show's overwhelming whiteness or Erin's public silence during critical social movements weren't simply nitpicking. They were pointing out structural gaps in the brand's foundation. The contrast between the reality of Laurel and the version that appears on Hometown highlights how carefully controlled and curated images can strain credibility, authenticity, trust. When we step back and look at all of these warning signs together, from Erin's defensiveness toward criticism, to her rigid parenting choices, to her selective representation of Laurel, a clear pattern emerges. These recurring issues reveal more about Erin's public persona than about isolated incidents. Her tendency to label critics as rude and shut down comments wasn't just a reaction. It was her way of drawing hard boundaries and controlling the narrative. Erin didn't only live by personal rules, She extended those rules into the public space and often presented her values as universal guidelines others should follow. Take her approach to technology and parenting. She wasn't satisfied simply keeping her own child away from devices. Through initiatives like Osprey, she extended that philosophy outward, advocating for all children to avoid social media until after high school. While this may seem protective and well-intentioned, problems arise when someone uses their public platform to normalize personal choices as universal solutions. What feels protective and normal to one family may feel impractical or even overbearing to others with different circumstances. This selective storytelling is also woven into Hometown itself. The show markets itself as being rooted in community revival and local life. But the stories it highlights are often limited to a narrow segment of Laurel. With Laurel's population being majority Black, the near absence of Black homeowners or their stories is not just oversight, it's deliberate shaping of the narrative. The curated picture of Laurel that viewers see on television is partial, not whole. That raises an important question. At what point does curation stop being authentic representation and start becoming a mask? These patterns hint at something deeper. When a public figure holds their image too tightly, contradictions eventually emerge at the seams. Critics aren't just reacting to Erin's choices. They're reacting to how she manages what gets through. The warning is clear. When a persona appears too pristine, too edited, people begin to notice what's being left out. The wholesome home renovator image shifts into one of someone carefully filtering reality. Of course, Erin and her defenders offer counter-arguments. She has explained that tight budgets force difficult design compromises, like using an awning to preserve valuable woodwork or placing a stove under a window for practical reasons. On parenting and tech, she frames her stance as protective rather than prescriptive. Supporters see this as conviction, not coercion. On the issue of racial justice, she and Ben argue that silence on social media doesn't equal moral silence. They choose to live their values in real life, instead of feeding algorithms with performative posts. Some fans accept these defenses, recognizing that reality TV is heavily shaped by producers and editors, meaning Erin and Ben may not have had complete control over how Hometown portrayed Laurel. But others remain skeptical, feeling that these explanations lean more toward rationalizations than real engagement. Skepticism tends to grow when someone frames personal preferences as universal solutions, or when every criticism is answered with production constraints. Ultimately, Erin Napier's public image sits at the intersection of authenticity and curation. She and Ben built Hometown into a brand that feels warm, comforting, and reliable. But beneath that surface are recurring signals that tell a more complicated story: defensiveness toward criticism, personal rules turn public campaigns, and a selective representation of Laurel that downplays uncomfortable realities. These weren't scandals, but consistent choices that, when pieced together, raise questions about authenticity. By 2024, when Erin told critics of Hometown Takeover to stop being ugly and even suggested they unfollow her, it echoed her earlier decision to disable Instagram comments back in 2020. These weren't just emotional reactions. They were decisions that demonstrated a low tolerance for dissent. Similarly, founding Osprey wasn't just about her own daughter. It was about extending her personal parenting philosophy into the public domain. And when Hometown continued presenting a majority Black city as nearly all white, critics saw not oversight, but omission. So, did we ignore warning signs? In a way, yes. Popularity has a way of softening contradictions, making them feel irrelevant. Fans want the comforting story of a couple fixing houses and caring for their community. But those early voices pointing out the curated image weren't nitpicking. They were highlighting consistent choices about image and control. Paying attention to them wouldn't have been cynical. It would have been careful. And in the long run, careful attention is what keeps public figures accountable to the communities they claim to represent. The story of Erin Napier in Hometown is not just about a TV show or even about design choices. At its heart, it is about the responsibility that comes with visibility. When you hold a national platform that shapes how millions of people view a community, Your decisions about what to highlight and what to leave out carry real weight. Laurel, Mississippi is not just a charming southern town with historic homes. It is a place with deep cultural and racial complexity. And any portrayal that filters out large parts of that reality begins to reshape truth into something more convenient. The warnings. Then, were never about nitpicking aesthetics or questioning every decision. They were about patterns. Each time Erin silenced critics, doubled down on rigid boundaries, or presented a curated image of Laurel that left out its black majority, she contributed to a larger story about control and curation. This is why fans and observers began to notice. When every defensive choice stacks on top of the last, what emerges is not an isolated incident but a recognizable pattern of image management. And this is where the credibility question becomes unavoidable. When the version of Laurel presented to the world doesn't match the Laurel that exists in census data, in history and in lived experience, trust begins to erode. Viewers who once tuned in for comfort now start to wonder what else is being edited out. The wholesome narrative of hometown restoration, family, community remains appealing, but its appeal feels less authentic when fans realize that it is constructed through exclusion. At the same time, Iran's defenders argue that the weight placed on her and Ben is unfair. After all, they are television hosts, not sociologists or policymakers. Their goal was never to capture the entire reality of Laurel, but to tell uplifting stories about design and restoration. From this view, critics expect too much of a reality show. Budgets, producers, and network executives all shape what makes it on air. Erin and Ben may want to highlight more diverse stories, but without creative control. Their ability to do so could be limited. This defense is important. It acknowledges that television is never raw reality, only edited storytelling. But it also reveals the tension at the core of the controversy. If a show builds its brand on community, representation, and authenticity, then it cannot also hide behind the excuse of curation when uncomfortable truths are pointed out. The brand and the message cannot exist without accountability. The question then becomes, where do we draw the line? How much of a public figure's curated image should be taken at face value, and how much should we demand transparency about what is being left out? Erin's choices, whether it was silencing critics online, advocating for parenting rules as universal solutions, avoiding visible commentary on racial justice, highlight this dilemma. They show how quickly the line between personal boundaries and public responsibility can blur. And for fans, this tension matters. Because when someone becomes a cultural figure, the relationship with the audience shifts. Viewers no longer see just Erin and Ben Napier, the small-town couple renovating homes. They see Erin and Ben as symbols of community, of Southern charm, of family values. And symbols carry expectations. In this light, the criticisms of Hometown and its selective portrayal of Laurel are not simply about diversity or inclusion. They are about trust. They are about whether the image being sold matches the reality it claims to represent. They are about whether silence in moments of crisis is thoughtful restraint or avoidance of responsibility. They are about whether a brand built on local authenticity can truly call itself authentic. When entire voices of that local community are missing, ultimately, the story of Erin Napier's warnings is about patterns that reveal more than words ever could. Quick defensiveness, curated silence, rigid personal rules turned public. These are not scandals, but signals. They signal how tightly managed images can unravel when pressed. They remind us that every polished brand is not just a story of what is shown, but also of what is hidden. And they leave fans asking the hardest question of all. If the image feels too perfect, what truths are being left outside the frame?